This is about how to steal your opponent's athleticism. Even if we're a freak athlete out there, and you're in college, high school, or youth, middle school, you're going to meet opponents who have the same level of athleticism as you, and maybe even better. And certainly, a lot of kids, especially when you get into middle school and youth wrestling, even your first freshman, maybe sophomore year of high school, at times the kids, they don't have the athleticism yet because they haven't really fully matured. They don't have the testosterone going. Usually once that takes place, the athleticism gap closes quickly. And what you'll find is that kids, they might grow a foot, they lose body fat, they're stronger, their attitude changes because you become a man, and it all has to do with testosterone. But let's just pretend that you yourself or your wrestler is just a normal athlete, and they're having problems with the more God-given athletes. What's great about wrestling is this, and you don't see this in the raw sports. And I've read a great book. I think it was called The Sports Gene, and they clarify the difference between a raw sport and the more of the skill type sports. A raw sport like Olympic sprinting, sure, you have to be born with a certain type of genetic makeup and level of athleticism. Well, in wrestling, I can take your athleticism away from you. I can do that through circling to your back leg. And these are all things we cover at our wrestling camps. And so for those of you who've been involved with our camps and stuff over the years, this is all nothing new, but it's worth repeating. So if I circle to the back leg, I can keep my head lower than yours. My rule when I was a wrestler was my head's lower than yours or you get hit. And if they would get their head lower than me, then I would snap them. And you get used to wrestling in a lower stance. When your opponents try to get as low as you, they're usually not good at being there. So that comes down to just a positioning thing. But a lot of it's just being hard-headed and trying to maintain superior position. So if my head and chest are lower than yours, it's tough for you to score on me because I'm lower. So just body position is a great way to take your opponent's athleticism away. Besides circling to the back leg, how about controlling the attack hand? There's several ways of doing that. We pretty much like to do it with the underhook, but you can grab a wrist, Russian 2-on-1, inside tie, elbow control is probably our second best way to control your opponent's attack arm because there's one arm he's shooting with most of the time. How about leg riding? That's a big part of our program, as you know. It's a huge part of the Dream Season Camp, the 3-position camp, our academy. Leg riding is what we consider to be the secret weapon for many reasons. I know when I was a wrestler in college, I was cutting a lot of weight, and I couldn't wrestle well in the third period. And our coaches were like, Joe C was like, you need to learn to ride legs. We got to get riding points, riding time. And we want to, if you get a takedown first period, we want to be able to ride people in the third. And within 2 weeks, I was riding the best guys in the nation. And it really changed my wrestling. And it was just kind of like, just a big light bulb went off in my head. And I decided, if I'm ever a high school coach or a youth coach or have a son that wrestles, I'm going to make my team and my kids ride legs. And then years later, I guess I was done with wrestling. I was finishing up school, started my master's degree, and Mark Perry, the assistant coach at the time at Oklahoma State, he wanted me to coach his son, little Mark, who now is NCAA champ from Iowa and at the University of Illinois is one of the coaches now as we speak. I coached little Mark at the state tournament, and I don't know, he was like 51-0 with 49 pins or something. He was a phenom even as a kid, but he rode everybody with legs and pinned them. He rode double legs, and I remember I was sitting there coaching this kid, and I was like, this is more proof that if I'm a coach, we're going to be the best leg riders in America. And that's the reason college coaches call us, is because they like the fact that our guys ride legs. And that's how a freshman beats a senior. That's how a college guy enters right into the college wrestling room as a freshman and starts to make his mark. That's how an average athlete steals the athleticism away from the better athlete, the better God-given athlete. You can't do that in the raw sports. If you're a wide receiver and you're a freak athlete, I can't grab you. I can't control the basketball player, but I can do that in the sport of wrestling. I can steal your athleticism away through tactics, and one of the best ways is through leg riding. And so I would encourage you to consider that. And if you're sitting there saying, my son is a good athlete, but he's not a great athlete, or my son, he's 12, but these other kids look like they're 14. They look like 14 and 15-year-olds, and my son looks like he's 10. He hasn't hit, there's a maturity gap there. You don't want to wait 2 or 3 years before your son has success. He might be losing now because he's getting, big armed is what we used to call it. He's just getting thrown around, but maybe his wrestling skills and technique and desire and attitude are all in place. It's just these more mature kids are beating him. You need to adjust your tactics, and you can do that in wrestling. You can't do that in other sports, and that's one reason I love the sport of wrestling. And I don't care about other sports. I haven't watched a sport in ever. I don't really care about them. I don't really like sports besides wrestling. But wrestling is cool because everybody has a chance to have success, and you don't see that in Olympic sprinting or the wide receiver. What happens is we all like the little the middle school kid or the high school kid who rushes for 1,000 yards on the football field. But I don't care about that kid. I'll get him on the wrestling mat, even if he's a great wrestler, and through developing my skills in these tactical areas, especially leg riding, I'll take his athleticism right away from him. Sure, he might have people giving him standing ovations on the football field, but that's football, right? I'll tie him up, I'll bury him, and just be through superior wrestling skills and tactics. So there's some good advice on taking your opponent's athleticism away from them. It is something that some people don't really think about. We think, oh, well, my son or my daughter, they're great athletes, but not as good as these other kids. So we'll see how they do. I don't expect very much from them. I've heard parents say these things, and it just makes me roll my eyes, because if you would really embrace the sport of wrestling and say, my son or daughter is a great athlete, but these others are better. So we're going to get really strong. We're going to underhook. We're going to wrestle low. We're going to master a tie-up that controls the attack arm. Everybody should be a leg riding master. Even the freak athletes out there. We have some of those in my rooms too. Don't get me wrong. And they know that hey, I'm a gifted athlete, but that doesn't mean I'm going to win on the wrestling mat. You might have a big dollar sign on your forehead if you were a sprinter or a wide receiver or running back, but those raw sports. But your athleticism, I would say, can be an advantage, but the advantage stops as soon as the skill development of our opponents develops. And so even our best athletes, they know that, hey, you know what, the gap's going to close, and I'm okay with that. And I'm going to have kids who are just as good at athletes as I am. And I, too, need to learn how to control and change the way I wrestle slightly. And also, leg riding is a big part of that. I remember a match a long time ago when I was in college. I had to wrestle a guy, and he ended up being an NCAA finalist a couple times. And it was getting ready to walk on the mat. And my teammate, Alan Freed, he grabbed me by the arm and said, you better tie this guy up. He goes, I worked out with him this summer. He goes, because I like to wrestle kind of from the outside and forehead to forehead, kind of was quick or whatever. And I'm okay. And I try to walk away, and he grabbed me by the arm, and he has his beady little eyes. And he goes, Nick, you're not going to win unless you tie this kid up. Trust me. He goes, he is a freak. And I was like, he kind of scared me. I was like, okay. So I tied him up, and he was ranked number 1 in the nation back then, and I won the match. And I remember walking off the mat, and he went out there and wrestled, and probably an hour later, he's like, dude, that was a good match. He goes, I told you, and this guy hit a freight train double from 12 foot away, and and I scrambled out, but his power was unbelievable. And so I think about that sometimes, and I too have had to change my wrestling to beat guys who maybe were better athletes than I was, even though I thought I was a pretty good athlete. So it runs across the board. But certainly if you're someone who maybe just thinks that you're born a wrestler, now you know better, and maybe you can use some tactics, especially leg riding and short leg riding. We don't ride long legs. That's just a waste of time. Short leg riding. Ride the hips, ride the back, power riding, and that's what we do, and that's the best way for you guys to close the gap on these kids. And implement those tactics, it'll make a big difference. So subscribe on this YouTube account. We'll put more videos out here to help share, and certainly can help you guys along your path. Check us out at purlerwrestling.com. Like us on Facebook, Purler Wrestling Inc., and come train with us.